Thank you all for coming along tonight. What we want to do tonight is introduce this is the first session of what will be our mobile game series. What we want to try and do with this series is we want to try and build a game for mobile and actually deploy it to the App Store. But we really want to do this from a very beginner's point of view. So you don't have to have any type of coding skills or any other kind of skills like that to join in with us to make this game. And we're going to start from the ground up on as much stuff as we can. And as we get into a few sessions down the line, you guys, the new people among you guys will have learnt a few more skills, and then we'll be able to get a bit more technical towards the end. But initially, we're going to start with the most basic stuff possible. So while we're doing this recording, just please be aware that we've got a fair session on tonight. So just try and leave your questions to the end. So tonight is about the introduction to source control. So how many people here have used source control before? Yep, okay, so maybe half of you. And the other half of you have never used source control before. What about the Unreal Engine? How many of you guys have used the Unreal Engine before? Yep, okay, so a few new people to the engine and a few new people to source control. Okay, so that's great. That's exactly where we want to start with this series. So source control is a great topic, and when you get into it, it's a really indispensable tool. So we're going to run through that tonight, and I'm going to try and explain to you how it all works, and show you the easy way to get started with it, because source control can be a fairly complicated topic. So the first question about source control, you guys have probably heard of Git or GitHub. A lot of people have heard of that before. So these are the source control tools. So Git is a version control system. It's the actual program that we're going to use for our version control. GitHub is a company that offers a hosting service for Git repositories. So they have a website called github.com. You'll need to sign up for a free account there. It's all free, and in order to use the source control with GitHub. Now, there's also a way to work locally with Git. You don't have to push your Git repositories out into the GitHub cloud. You can also work with them on your local machine because Git is just a program. That's all it is. It's a program that tracks changes in your source control files. So once we do stuff with our local files, what we're going to do later is we're going to push that out to the GitHub repository, which is pushing it out to the cloud-based repository. Once it's in the cloud, other people can then connect to that repository and then pull down these changes onto their local machines. And you'll see as we progress through this particular session, you'll see exactly how to use it totally from scratch. So when you get started with Git, the unfortunate reality is that you have to learn a few new terms. In order to understand version control systems, you need to learn a few new terms. But trust me, this is the big thing to climb with version control. Once you get over the terminology part, the rest of it is all downhill from there. It's really quite simple. So I'm not a Git, wouldn't consider myself to be a Git expert, but I know enough to get myself by, and that's what I want to try and show you guys tonight. How to go from really not knowing much about Git or anything about Git to be able to understand it, at least the source control system, and with the tools that I'm going to show you tonight, you should be able to use it. So let's just run through a few of these terms quickly. So a repo is just a repository. Init is something that is a term used for when you create a repository or initialize a repository. Clone means to copy a repository. Local is just simply your local computer, the machine you're working on. Remote is a remote host. In our case, it's going to be github.com, but it doesn't have to be. It's just a remote host of some sort. Pull is the act of getting changes from a remote and then putting them onto your local machine. And a push is the opposite of that. It is to take the files that you have under your source control on your local machine and push them to a remote. And that can be a remote like GitHub, or it can be a remote like a server or whatever. And the last term that we really want to have a look at is called a pull request. This is a little bit different to a pull. This is where you are requesting a remote repository to accept your changes. So I know all that can sound very confusing, so the best way to do it is to just jump in and get your hands dirty. So that's what we're going to do. So we don't want to really use the command line interface for Git as much as we can get away from it, mainly because it's just complicated. So if you're just getting started with Git, the way to do it is with a GUI. So a tool that I've selected to show you guys tonight is called GitKracken. It's a great GUI for Git. I use it myself personally. It's not the only one. There's plenty of other ones. There's GitKracken. There's also SourceTree and plenty of others. And that's the same with GitHub. GitHub is a provider of hosted repositories. They're not the only one. There's also Bitbucket and all this other stuff. So you guys can check out those independently. For this project, we're going to show you how to use GitKracken and we're going to use GitHub. So you can follow that link there to download GitKracken. We will do that and I'll show you how to install it. So let's do that right now. So in our downloads folder, we have got the GitKracken setup, the installer we just downloaded from that link that I showed you on the previous slide. So let's just run that and we'll install GitKracken. Indeed, we'll get Kraken ourselves. So when you first install it, it's going to ask you to sign in. So what we'll do is, out of all these options here, you can create a free GitKracken account if you so choose to. We will sign in straight with GitHub because that's just very quick and easy to do. So with GitHub, you can simply go to github.com and sign up for a free account. That's all fairly straightforward. So once you have a GitHub account, you can then sign in with GitHub here in GitKracken. So I've just got my email address here, put in my actual GitHub password, and then sign in. Click this button here, not this sign in button, this actual sign in with GitHub button. And it will contact GitHub and try and authenticate. It'll tell you if it worked in the browser, so that's all good. Now inside of GitKracken, we can see that we've got a profile set up for ourselves here, and then here we can start using GitKracken and GitHub all together. Okie doke. So now we want to try and tie what we are going to do with our source control into what we're doing with Unreal Engine. So the second thing I want to show you guys is Unreal Engine. We're going to put version control is really the act of putting files under version control. So you might be surprised to know that not every file created by Unreal Engine you need to keep under source control. So that's what I want to show you now. There is a few files the engine will build automatically for you all the time when you run the engine. So let's do that. Let's do that now. So here I'm in the engine. I'm just going to launch and create just a test project that we can run through this example with. And I'll show you in the actual file explorer here what files we can get rid of. Okie doke. So we're going to do a new project here. I'm just going to do a blank project. We'll do it for a mobile or a tablet. We can choose to do scalable or 2D and no starter content. Don't worry too much if you haven't seen this new project window before. For the sake of source control, this part is not important and we will go over this again later. So I'm just choosing to put this into the Unreal Projects folder, and for the project name, I'm just going to call this source control. Okay, and then we'll create the project. So notice in our Unreal Projects directory, we get a folder called the project name, source control created for us. Inside here, we've got a bunch of folders that Unreal's made and a project file, and this happens as the project loads up. So the project's now working in here. We can start working around in the editor and start making our game. But we'll come back to that later. So I'm just going to close the editor down. Now, out of these directories here, the intermediate and the save directories are actually created by the engine at the time that the editor loads. So we can actually take these directories and physically remove them, and then next time we run, they'll just come straight back again as Unreal Engine rebuilds those files for us. So the reason I'm showing you this is we don't want to put those files under source control. There's no point putting them under source control because the engine's just going to build them anyway. Okay, so what we will do though is now that we have a project, we will initialize a local repo. So that is a repo that's just on our local machine here, and we're going to use GitKracken to do this so that we can avoid having to do anything with the command line. When we initialize the repository, there's a file that we can use called a gitignore file, and it's going to tell Git or GitKracken which files to ignore in our project, in our actual project directory hierarchy. So as you saw, the intermediate and save directories, we don't need to have them. So we want to ignore them, and so we will do that. So to initialize the repo, we go back to GitKracken here. We're going to click on the little folder and do init, which is to create a repository. We're going to do a local repository only, and we can browse to the path for that repository. So I'm just going to select that project file, click select project. There is a gitignore template and license optional here. You can have a play around with those settings when you do this for yourself. For now, we're not going to do that because I want to show you how to create the gitignore file. When we do it, this screen here is showing what's the project history, if you like. So GitKracken creates an initial commit that has a README file in it, and that's all it has. Then it just looks at the directory we've told it to, and it's looking for changes. So over here on the right, you can see there's a list of all the files here. These are new files as far as Git's concerned because they're not in the repository, and so they're listed over here. As you can see, we've got files here in the intermediate directory and also the save directory if I scroll through and find it. Okay, and we don't want to keep those. So how do we stop GitKracken look at them? We use the gitignore file. So if I browse to our project again, what we do is we simply put in a file called gitignore. So .gitignore. Now, I'm going to show you what we don't want is the .text on the end of it, because that makes it appear as a text file. At the moment, that's how it's behaving. There's a bit of a drama with Windows in the respect that you can't just take that off. It's not going to like that. So what you can do for this is you can hold left shift down, right click, and then you can open up a shell window. It doesn't matter if it's like a regular terminal window or a PowerShell, it really makes no difference. So if we do a directory listing here, we can see the gitignore.txt in the list. To rename it in Windows, you just type ren and then the file name, and you can push tab to get tab completion. And we're just going to rename it to gitignore, and that's it, just straight .gitignore, and that's all. Now, if we have a look at the directory, we can see that file's been renamed. That's what we want. It's unfortunate that we have to do it that way. I wanted to show it to you for the sake of completion in case you guys need to create one in Windows. And so there it is. So we can still edit this with a text editor. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Now, we do need to put in here some information about what to ignore. That can get a little bit complicated, so I'm not going to type this out by hand, but I have created a repository in the Brisbane Unreal Engine repository on GitHub. The Brisbane Unreal Engine is an organization on GitHub you can go to. I've got a repository in here called the UE4 ignore file, and in here it has everything that you would need to ignore. If anything else comes up, this is pretty comprehensive. If anything else comes up, we will add it. So what we can do is Control-C to copy that stuff, stick it into the notepad, Control-V, and then File, Save. That file will then be saved. We don't have to worry about this anymore. This is the last time really we'll have to worry about the gitignore file. But when we come back to GitKracken, notice we don't have any of that stuff we don't want anymore under getting looked at here as a changed file. Okay, so next thing we want to do is, now that we've got some changed files, let's commit them. And a commit, what is a commit? Well, a commit is a term used for capturing a snapshot of your current project files. So right now, our repo is empty. We want to capture all of our changes and then tell the repo to save a copy of those changes. That's called a commit. So it's a two-part process. First of all, we're going to stage changes. Then we're going to commit changes with a little message to tell us what we did. So when we do that, our project history in GitKracken is going to become updated. We're going to have two entries there. The first being the initial commit that we made when we initialized the repo, and then the second commit being the one that we are just about to make. So let's do that to see how that works. So we've got our files here. We're going to click Stage All Changes, and then down here in the summary, we're going to say Project Creation. Okay, and then now we've got two commits in here, each being a different snapshot of what's happened in those directories. Okay, now what you could do is just make changes and commit, make changes and commit, make changes and commit. If you're doing this at home for yourself, for your own personal repos, that's absolutely fine. For the sake of completion, I want to talk to you about branches. It is a little bit more complicated, but it brings a much more possibilities to your ability to use Git and GitKracken and be able to do some cool things with the repo. So branch is simply a tangent, if you like, a different path of changes compared to the current path that we're on. This will all start to make more sense as we do it, but basically a branch is just a name of a different path that we can go down with our changes. We're already using a branch, it's called master, but now we're going to try and make a new branch so that we can then tangent off our changes a little bit. Generally speaking, you would push your changes to a branch called develop all the time, and then when you're ready to release something, you would then merge develop with master. But we'll get to that later. So let's make a develop branch. So again, this is reasonably simple. We can right click on this guy and choose create a branch here, and then we just give it a name, DVLOP, develop. When we make that branch, GitKracken is going to what's called check that branch out, or check out on that branch immediately as soon as we create it. So a checkout is basically just saying, I want to look at this branch of information. So when you've checked out a branch, you're looking at that version of events, if you like, of the repository. So we've got a new branch there. Let's just do something and make another commit. Let's see, what can we do here? Let's add a new folder. We'll call it. Let's rename that to say UI. In the UI, we'll make another new folder. We'll call it main menu. And here I'm going to create what's called a widget blueprint. If this is new to you, if you're not sure what a widget blueprint is, don't worry about it. It's not important right now. What's important is that we're changing the underlying file structure by creating changes. So I'm going to call this main menu underscore WBP. So now we have a widget blueprint. In here, I'm just going to dump some text, and I'm just going to call the text main menu. Again, don't worry too much. If you have never seen this editor, that's really not important right now. So now we have a main menu widget blueprint that we can now put under our version control because we've created it. So over here in the top of our work in progress, you can see this asset that we just created, main menu underscore WBP.uAsset. So that's that same asset that you see here in the editor. So we're going to stage that change, and we're going to say created main menu widget. And then push that in. So now you can see that there's a deviation here in the editor. We've got a master branch and the develop branch. They're now out of sync. So master and develop have become different now. Okay. So now that we've got different branches, how do we switch between them? How do we move between them to see what's up, what's happening with it? So basically all we have to do is double click on the title of the branch, and then GitKracken will do the rest for us. So I want to show you how that means. So you remember the change we just made here? We created this main menu widget blueprint. So let me just close the editor. When you switch branches, it's very important that you close the editor, because the editor has files open, and if you try and change the underlying file structure with the editor open, it's not going to work. So now we're back in GitKracken. I'm just going to double click on this master branch here. See, we've got a little message saying that we've checked out successfully a master branch. So remember, checkout just means that we are now looking at that version of events. If we come back here into the project and open it up, we will see that there is no main menu widget blueprint, because master does not know about this change because we made the change on the develop branch. Okay, see, we've got no folders, no main menu widget blueprints. All right, and of course, changing back again is just a matter of double clicking on develop, check out again. We've checked out successfully a different branch. We open up our project now. Our main menu widget blueprint is back, just like magic. And it is a little bit, I guess, a little bit like magic. It's good in the respect that you can have this level of tracking changes and be able to do different stuff with them. So you can see here is our main menu widget blueprint with the changes that we made to it. Okay. All right, so we've got a local repository. We can make changes to that local repository. We can make branches of our changes of our local repository, and we can switch between branches. Now we're starting to get pretty technical now with what we can do with our skills, which is that's an excellent place to start. You definitely want to have a bit of a play around with this yourself because it does take a little bit of doing just to get the hang of it. A little bit scary at first. Once you've got the hang of it, totally easy. So now in the next level of evolution, we want to try and take our local repository and we want to try and marry it up with a remote repository, which we're going to use github.com. So in order to marry the two together, we need to use our github.com and create a repo on GitHub. Okay, so we're going to go to GitHub, click the new button. It's going to ask us to have some information about this repo. We've got to choose a name for it, all that stuff. Then we can create the repository. Once we've got the repository, it's going to give us a URL to that repository, which is just simply an address to an internet location. Once we've got that address to the internet location, we can then plug it back into GitKracken. But let's take it a step at a time and create the GitHub repo first. So here in the Brisbane Unreal Engine organization, I'm just going to click new, create a new repository. So it asks for a name. We'll just call this source control demo. That sounds like a good name. We won't worry about a description just for this example. We're going to leave it public. You can have private repositories, in which case the public can't see those repositories, but you do have to pay a small amount to GitHub for that privilege. I think it's like $7 a month or $10 a month or something. Well worth doing it if you have a lot of repositories and you don't want them to be publicly available. For us and the purposes of this mobile game, it's totally fine. We're not going to worry about initializing the repository with a gitignore file because we've created our own. So we'll click the Create Repository button. So once we've done that, it's going to give us a link here. This is the actual repository itself, but it's totally empty right now, and GitHub knows this, so it's showing us how we can get an address to it. So I'm just going to copy it to the clipboard. Oh, hold on a sec. Let's just have a look at our slides here. So adding a remote repository with GitKracken, what we can do is we can click the plus remote button and we can put in the path that GitHub's given us so that we can then link GitKracken and GitHub together so that our local repo and our remote repo are connected. Once the GitHub once it's listed, then we've successfully connected to our GitHub changes. It won't let us finish this step if there's anything wrong with our URL or anything like that. If it can't see the repo, it won't allow us to finish this step. So let's do that. I'm going to copy this to the clipboard. Then I'm going to go to GitKracken. I'm going to click plus on the remote. In the URL here, I'm just going to paste in, Control V, paste in that URL. For a name of it, I'm just going to call it GitHub. Okay, and then I can click Add Remote here. GitKracken's going to reach out to that repository to make sure it exists. And if it exists, it's going to create it right here. And you can see it here now in the Remotes tab. So we have, in this step, successfully connected GitKracken and GitHub, our local repo, if you like, and GitHub. Right. So we've got a remote repository up on GitHub. It's totally empty right now. So we want to populate it with our changes so that we can share our changes. To do that, the operation is called a push operation, and the GUI makes it super simple. You just have to push the push button and it will push all our changes up to the repo. We will have to confirm our branch name because it's not master. We have changed our branch name to develop. So we'll have to confirm that, and then it will allow us to push it up. You'll notice that the icon for the remote actually appears in the UI on this commit. You can see the remote next to the computer here. That will happen for us as well, and that's how we know that GitKracken and our local repos are on the same branch and are at the same level of changes. Then we'll be able to refresh our page on GitHub, and we'll see instead of the interface showing us how to copy the link, we'll actually see our project changes. Right, so let's do that then. So we're on our develop branch. We've got our remote connected, so we're going to push the push button. It's going to ask us just to confirm that we want to push to the develop branch, because the develop branch doesn't exist out in GitHub yet. We haven't created it out there. We've only got it on our local machine. We click submit, and the files are pushed up to the repo. This could take a little while depending on how many files you've got, how big they are, all that kind of stuff. Once it's finished, you'll get a little message to say that it's finished. Now when we come back to our repository and refresh, instead of getting that message, we see our project changes. You can see here in our main menu here, we've got that main menu widget blueprint asset. And that's our remote repository. Okay, so we've done our local repository. We've created branches. We can move between branches and changes. We've created a remote repository on GitHub. We are able to take our local repository and marry it with our remote repository by pushing our changes up so that the two have become synced. Now we need to figure out what are we going to do with our branches. Now that we've got some branches that have different levels of changes, we don't want to have heaps of branches that just branch out into infinity. We need to be able to bring them back together again, so that if we create a branch, work on something that we like and we want to incorporate it in our game, we need to be able to get it back into the develop branch so it's in our game. So to do that, we use a new term here. It's called a merge. And we're going to merge our branch into the develop branch. So we'll probably have to create a new branch first, make a couple of changes, and then merge it back. Again, if you're doing this for yourself at home, this is really not a necessary step. You don't have to do this. If you want to do everything on master, that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, when you get started, that's probably a good way just to get started and then have a play around with branches. So here is a good opportunity to talk about what a project like branch flow scenario actually would look like. So in this diagram here, we've got a bunch of different branches. So we've got the master branch, which we created initially. We've got a release branch, which for the mobile game, we're not really going to use this. Some people use a release branch for pre-release testing or spinning up their project before they actually release it to master. But we're not going to need that. The develop branch we've already got. Feature branches are branches you would make if you want to add something new. So if you want to add, let's say, we'll make a new feature branch and add something and then merge it back into our develop branch. So this is what it would look like. You would just keep hitting the develop branch until you're finished with your stage 1 of your project, and when you're ready to release it, you then merge it back into master, and it's a finished project. Okay, so let's do that. So where are we at now? We've got a develop branch, so let's make a new branch here. Let's just call it my feature. So we make a new branch, it's immediately going to check us out on that branch, so any further changes that we make now are going to be on the my feature branch. So let's go into our level blueprint here and just make that turn up. So when we begin play, we want to create a widget. What is it? Widget. Create a widget. We'll create a widget of class my main menu widget blueprint, and we'll add that to the viewport. Again, if you haven't seen this before, this is the blueprint scripting. This is a really great way of being able to add functionality to your game without having to do any coding. For this whole project, we're going to try and stay out of coding, just simply using the blueprints. All I've really done here is I'm creating a main menu widget blueprint and I'm adding it to the viewport, so just so we can see it on the screen, that's all. So we need to save this level now, so let's just get out of there. I just want to create a new folder in content. Let's call this one maps. Then we can go file, save, current as, maps, and we'll call this map main menu. So whenever you edit the level blueprint, you have to, it saves with your map. So there it is there. It's a new file. It's really, for our purposes of looking at it in source control, it's just simply a new file. When we click play now, you can see the main menu appears on the screen here. That's what we asked it to do. Okay. So we've got the My New Feature branch active. We've got our main menu map that we've saved. So we'll stage those changes. Actually, before we do that, I just want to change the main menu map to be the default map for the editor. So I'm just going to go here to the project settings, maps and modes, and we'll just make this main menu the default map. Okay, that's just a small change to the engine INI config. If you click on a file, you can see exactly what actually happened to it. If it's a text file, if it's a binary file, you can't see what changed. But if it's text-based, you can. It gives you a little preview there. But anyway, we are not too interested in what exactly changed there, but we do want to keep those changes. So we'll say added main menu to viewport. Okay, so we've got a My Feature branch now that has a change. And what we want to do with that change is we want to merge it back into develop so that it kind of closes the circle now. We're happy with our main menu appearing. We want to close the circle on that, get it back into our develop branch, because develop branch is generally what everyone's going to be looking at. So very easy to do. We grab it, we drag it onto develop, and we let go. Here we choose merge My Feature into develop, and it will do that for us automatically. Then we can check out develop by double clicking on it. There we are. So we have merged two branches together, and you can see here in the little in the UI here, different branches and stuff will split out so that it doesn't look like the it's all off the one branch. That's very useful to understand, that there are different branches out there that are being used. Okay. So we created our new feature branch. We did our awesome feature we're super happy with. Now we've merged it back into develop. Once we do that part, our new feature branch has really become obsolete. We don't really need it anymore. So we can really get rid of it. We're never really going to go back to it unless, we're really not going to go back to it once we're happy that we've merged it back into develop. So deleting branches, again, very simple. We're going to just find that branch, right click on it and delete it. And away it will go. It's important to note here that you can't delete an active branch, so you have to be off the branch to delete it. So here we've got My Feature branch. We're going to choose delete My Feature. It's going to warn us about this being a destructive action. Once you delete a branch, it's gone for good. So we're going to delete it. We don't need it again really because we don't really need to go back there. In our history though, it's going to stay like this. We're going to know that there was a branch created to do that. Okay, now just before we get onto that, let's just have a look at what's going on here. So we've got some stuff that we've changed here. We can push that up to GitHub. And let's just have a look in GitHub and see what's happened. Okay, if we look in our branches here, you can see we've got a develop branch and not a My Feature branch because we just used it to move our develop branch forward without modifying it first, so it won't appear here in GitHub. Okay, I know we've covered a lot so far. There's one last thing that's really important to cover, and that is how to create a pull request. You won't always have the access to a repository to just go and create your own branches and do this kind of stuff that we've been showing you so far. If you want to add to a repository that you don't have access to change, then you use what's called a pull request. Then what you can do is make your changes and you can ask the remote repository to accept your pull request, and that is how you make a change to a repository that you don't have access to make changes to. In order to do this, you need to fork the repo, make a new branch, commit your changes, and then create a pull request. To fork a repository in GitHub, you can just visit that repository and click the fork button. It'll allow you to fork it. Basically what that means is it's just going to recreate that repository in your GitHub, area, if you like, instead of on the actual repository that it's come from. We're not going to do that step right here because I can't fork a branch that I created. Then in GitKracken, once you've made your changes to create the pull request, you simply drag and drop that branch change onto the remote, and then you can choose to start a pull request. We need to fill in a little form. When you do a pull request, it's a little bit more, I guess, a little bit more formal than just making changes as you go. So when you do a pull request, you need to explain to the repository what changes you're making, why they should merge your stuff in. So the way that you do it is with the pull request form here. It says where your changes are coming from. So this would be the repo that you had forked, so your own personal repo. You then bring it into the to the real repo under the develop branch, or whichever branch they're using. Most of the time it will be the develop branch. You can give it a little title and a reason what's happened there, and then you can create the request. The owner of the repository will review it and either merge it in or message you back with changes. On GitHub, we can review the pull request. This is something as if we owned the repo. We can see what that person's pull request entails, and we can accept it or reject it. And then that's it. Once it's completed, it's completed. It'll go into the project history, and then when you pull down the main repo, you'll see your change merged into it. All right, so let's do just that. So to do that, let's make a new branch. So we'll make a new branch. What's a good branch name? Anyone got a branch name? Wellington, all right. Wellington it is. I say we're on Wellington now. Let's see what do we got here. So I think what we'll do is let's make these virtual joystick things disappear for the moment. Again, the change is not important. It's just the fact that we've changed the file that's important. So to make that happen, we're just going to grab the player controller. Get the touch interface and hook it in. Okay, again, it's a very simple change. It doesn't matter if you don't know what just happened there. That's really not important. Now when we play, the virtual joysticks are gone, and that's what we wanted, so that's great. We go back to our repo here. We see we've got a change. We stage our change. We removed virtual joystick. Okay, and so we've got that. So I'm going to push this change up to GitHub, but I'm not going to merge it into develop first. So we're going to create an actual branch on GitHub called Wellington. When we go back to our repo now, you'll see in GitHub we actually have a new branch now, as opposed to before it didn't create a branch because we merged it back in before we send it up to the repo. Righto, so here we see we've got a new branch now. To create our pull request for this, we can actually create a pull request to our own repo. That's no problems there. We just can't fork one that we already own. I'm going to grab Wellington here and I'm going to stick it onto develop on the GitHub C, the remote there. I'm just going to drag it onto develop and let go. Then it's start a pull request. We get the form. It's telling us what repo it's coming from, what repo it's going to. This will be your forked repo if you have to do a pull request. And then we can just put in a description here. Didn't like. Okay. So we create the pull request. So that's successfully created on GitHub. If we come back here and have a look, pull request. We've got a pull request here in the menu, remove virtual joystick. So you can see here we've got a little message. We didn't like the joystick, and so we removed it. This is where we can choose now, if we're the owner of a repo, do we accept this pull request or not? If we accept it, we can put it into whatever branch we want. Typically we would put it into develop branch, but it doesn't have to be. We can also review this change by pulling down this pull request and looking at it first, so that we can see exactly what we're dealing with before we bring it in. If we don't like everything about that, we can make a comment here and go back to the person who created the pull request and say, look, can you just change this or change that first? They can change it and add that to the pull request. That's fine. So for us, for the sake of example, let's say we're happy with that. So let's merge the pull request. Okay, remove the virtual joystick. We're going to confirm the merge. Okay, and there we go. So it's merged. It's asking us if we want to delete the branch. Like I was saying to you before, once you're done with branches, there really isn't much point having them around. There's not a great deal you can do with old branches, so it's just best to get rid of them. Okie doke. So we've deleted that branch, accepted the pull request. And so that's how it is. So in our commit list here, you'll see all that stuff. We've got the merging the pull request, all that stuff in our history. If we go back to GitKracken, not a lot's really changed here in GitKracken, but if we do a pull, which is grabbing the stuff from the remote repository, it's complaining here that Wellington doesn't exist on GitHub because it got merged and deleted. So we just check out our develop branch and then pull down our changes. Okay, and you can see what's happened here. We've merged in, even though we did it on GitHub, exactly the same result in the GUI. It's just merged back into develop. We still have a local Wellington branch we can delete. Okay, and that just cleans up our history for our own personal local repository. All right, so the last thing really that we want to talk about is cloning a repo. So we've created one, we've made changes and we've managed our changes, we made branches and managed our branches. We have pushed our changes up to our local, to our remote host GitHub. We've done some managing of our branches on GitHub by merging in a pull request. So one of the last things really to look at is how do we take someone else's repo and bring it into our local machine? That's called a clone. In order to clone a repo, there has to be a master branch. Otherwise, it's going to cause all sorts of trouble when we try and clone it. So we can use GitKracken, of course, to do this cloning. What we do is we create a new repository. This time we choose clone. We clone with the URL. You can also clone from GitHub if you've got your GitHub account hooked up, but URLs is fairly bulletproof. We give it the URL and then tell it where to clone it to. Then we can just double click on one of the remote branches because our local repository won't have any of the remote branches most likely, but we can just double click on one of the remote branches here in the GUI and it'll check us out, create and check out a branch for us. Okay, so let's do that. Let's do that. So what I think we'll do for this is let's just close the editor for a sec. Close the editor and open up our project again. I just want to make sure everything's opening up okay. While that's opening, I'll just go to GitHub and make sure that we've actually got a master branch here. So see in our branch list here, we don't actually have a put that back on this desktop. Okay, see in our GitHub repo, we don't actually have a master branch. We can actually create one by just typing in a branch name. There we go. So, and then we've got our master branch. Okay, so everything's opened okay here in the editor. We've got our main menu. We don't have our virtual joysticks. So let's be a bit rash here and delete this project totally. Okay, all right, that is probably happening because we've got GitKracken open here. So I'll just close GitKracken, try again. Okay. All right, so we've just we've undone everything we just did. We don't have a project anymore. There is no such thing. Let's bring it back because it's still here in our repo. Refresh GitHub, nothing changed here. That's exactly how you would expect. It's got a little bit of screen lag going on here. We go. Okay, we've got nothing. We've got absolutely nothing in GitKracken here. So on our remote repo, we can choose clone or download. You can download a repo as like a zip file if you like, and then you can unzip it on your local machine. But using GUI like GitKracken is the way to go, because if someone makes a change, you have to re-download a new zip file and all that sort of stuff. With GUI and using source control, you can just push the pull button and grab it straight down. So in order to grab it, we're going to use the URL here. So we just copy that to our clipboard. Then we're going to go to clone with a URL. We're going to paste that URL in there. It's going to ask us where we want it. So I'll just stick it straight in our Unreal Projects directory. And it's just got the default name of the repo. We'll just leave that. We can rename it if we want. And we'll click clone. This will just take a second to bring these things down from the internet. And we can click open now. Look at that. Everything is as we left it. Now in our source control demo here, notice we don't have those directories that we didn't put under source control. Not a problem. Next time we open up the project, of course, Unreal is going to rebuild them for us. And when this opens up, you'll see that it was exactly as we left it. So why is all this useful? Like, why are we doing all this? Like, we've gone over some reasonably complicated stuff, I guess, especially for beginners. But the reason we want to do this is to make it easy for you guys to collaborate with us. You know, we want to create a game with you guys, and we would really like it if you could bring down the latest changes to that game and have a look around with it, have a bit of a play with it. If you like or don't like something and you want to make a change, by all means, go and make a change to it. Create a new branch. Fork the repository if you want to give it back to us, and then give it back to us. We would love to see that. That would be great. And these tools like GitKracken and Git and GitHub, they all make it possible to do just that. Okay, so what we would like to do is to get on with the business of actually making our mobile game, the actual repo that we're going to use for our mobile game. So what we might do with that is let's just get started. I'm just going to can everything we've done, and we're just going to get started, make a fresh repository, go over all these steps again, just so you can see them again, and this will be our actual repository where we'll start collaborating. So I'll close down the editor. I'll close down GitKracken for now. I'll delete everything out of our project file here. Won't have any problems this time because GitKracken had files open before. In this repository here, I'm just going to go into the settings and what's it called? Source control demo. I'm going to delete it. All right, very destructive. Now it's all gone. So now there's no such repository. So we'll just start again, and this time I won't be going back through the slides. I'll just take it through just as you would do it. So I'm going to do a new project here in the Unreal Engine launcher. So this Unreal editor here that we're starting is just the starting point for all of your projects. It's just a way to create a new project, if you like. So we're going to do new project. We're going to start out with a blank project because when we show you how we would do content creating, you'll see that we can bring in, with a migration tool, we can bring in stuff we like into a project. So there's no real point starting with like a template in our case, because we're just going to spin up a new project, make some stuff that we like, and if we like it, we're just going to migrate it into our game project. So we just start with a blank slate. We are going to do it for mobile or tablet. We'll put it on scalable or 2D. We're not going to have any starter content either because, again, if we need to bring any content in, we will just migrate it in. Okie doke. So, I can never remember how to spell this. John, are you around?
Yeah.
D. Yep.
E-N-S-I-O-N.
Okie doke. Descension. Okay. All right, create project. You have to get that project name right because it's super, super hard to change later. Okie doke, so here we are with our blank project. So we're going to start up GitKracken. Before we do really anything, we're just going to start up GitKracken, initialize our repository, our local repository. So we're going to go to Init, local only. You can actually do this in multiple steps all at once, but when you're getting started, it's just best to just take it one step at a time. So just stick with the local one. You can have a bit of a play around and experiment with yourself. We're not going to make a gitignore template. I'm just going to create one like I did before. You can see now, because we don't have the gitignore file, we've got all that stuff we don't want under source control. So let's take care of that. So we're going to create a new file in here. We're going to call it .gitignore. It's going to be a text file because Windows won't have it any other way. So to change it, we're going to hold left shift, right click, open a shell window. Again, it doesn't matter if this is a PowerShell or a normal shell, this command will still work. REN is how you rename something. So gitignore, you can use tab for tab completion, just makes it easier to type. And then we're going to call it gitignore. Very important about the spelling. If it's not exactly this, Git won't recognize it. Take another look at our directory listing and we're good. So there it is. Now it is empty. Notice we haven't got anything turfed out of our project yet because we haven't populated this file with what we want to ignore. So that's our next step. So we'll open it up in a text editor. I've got this repo I've already created with this file contents in it. We'll definitely make sure there's a link to this in the video description. And then you can just grab this, all of it, Control C to copy it into the text file, Control V to paste it in, file, save. As soon as we click save, then we're back to where we want to be. So we'll stage those changes and we'll just call this project creation. Okay, so we've created this empty project on master. So next thing I want to do is I want to create the GitHub repo for it. So I'm going to go back to the regular page, click on a new repository. Descension. Is that the right spelling? D-E-S-C-E-N, D-E-S-C-E-N-S-I-O-N. Okay, very good. Okay, we're going to make that public, of course. You guys aren't going to be able to get it if it's not public. We're not going to worry about initializing it with any gitignore. Okay, now we have our empty repo again. So we're going to copy the repo address to our clipboard. In GitKracken here, we're going to add a new remote. Paste in that path here. We're going to call that remote GitHub. Add the remote. If everything goes well here, we'll see that the remote turns up here. It even gets the little icon from the repository itself. That's another way you can make sure that it's all good. And we're going to push up those changes because we want to make sure that this is all good. So we're going to push this up to the master branch. And then we're going to check GitHub, make sure everything's cool. once this is all done, I know this is a lot of steps, but once it's all done, it's really easy to manage from here. Okie doke, so there we go. Our project's up on GitHub now, ready to go. We can start creating branches, all that sort of stuff. No problems. In fact, let's do that. Let's create a develop branch because that's where we were going to want to do a lot of our stuff. So let's do a new level. We'll just do a totally empty level. In the content here, we'll just do a new folder. We'll call it maps. Do file, save as maps, and we'll call it main menu. Save. Okay, so now we've got a main menu file, so we've got something to change, to commit to. Now, in this case here, I created the file before I created the branch. Not a problem. I can create a branch whenever. I haven't committed any changes yet, so it's fine. So I'm going to call this branch develop, and it checks us out on develop immediately. Now we can stage this change, and we'll just call, oh, before I stage that, I'm just going to change the editor settings again to make this the default map. Project settings, sorry, maps and modes, main menu, main menu. Okie doke. And once we do that, it's going to change that to default engine IONI again. If we're going to have a look at that, you can see exactly what it did. Okay. Stage those. And we'll just call this added main menu level. Okay, and then we're going to push those changes up. We've got to confirm our develop branch name. And that should all be pretty quick because it was only just one file that we changed there. We refresh out there on GitHub and we'll see we've got a develop branch and a master. So there we go. When we do our changes, we're going to do all of our changes and we're going to push them into develop, and we're going to keep hitting develop branch until we're happy that we're ready to release something. When we're happy we're ready to release something, we'll merge it into master, create a production version of it, and release it. That could be quite a while. You know, there's a fair bit to do. Who knows what will come up in the course of doing this series. It's the first time we've tried anything like this, so we'll just take it as we go. Any community contributions, of course, are totally welcome and encouraged. We'd love you guys to help us make this game. It's be much more fun to do it together, don't you reckon? Than to just do it solo. So now that we've got this this repo out here, you guys can pull this down. And if you pull down this repo and switch to the develop branch, you'll be able to see our main menu there and have a bit of a play around with it. Okie doke. So that's everything I wanted to share with you guys tonight about how to get started with source control. If anyone's got any questions, just bear in mind I'm not a full-on Git expert, but I'll be happy to field any questions anyone's got. If I can, I'll do my best to answer them. Is everyone reasonably happy with how that, like the explanation? Does everyone understand what we're doing there and the main concepts? Yeah. All right, cool. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It's like I said, Git and GitHub are one choice. If you talk to experienced version control people, there's other types of version control like Subversion and other things like that. Perfast, I think someone was talking about. Perforce, sorry, was talked about earlier. So yeah, lots of different choices there. Git and GitHub are just a great way to get started. All right, excellent. So no questions. Awesome.
I was satisfied with GitHub. If you've got an edu address, EP address, or anything like that, you can get the GitHub paid for free, I believe.
Oh, very nice.
Which is also means you get the GitKracken paid version for free.
Yeah.
So it opens up a lot of opportunity.
Yeah,
So
right.
as long as you've got that edu in an email address, you actually have to email GitHub itself and say, I have an education account, and they actually apply it to your own account. So any students working about stuff, but exploit it. Did you get me an edu address? I'm sure someone
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks very much, everyone, for coming, and please come to our next one. We may even do stuff in the repo, or we probably will do stuff in the repo before we get to the next session. So Yeah, we'll keep you posted via our usual channels if we do that stuff, so that you guys can pull it down and check it out. And we've got a fair few people who have come forward as content creators already, and we really appreciate that. We really do. And if anyone else has any skills that you want to contribute, just bear in mind you don't have to be a coder or anything like that to contribute to this. If you want to do a crate model, that's fine. The obligatory crate, that'd be totally fine. We're happy to accept that kind of stuff. So, and likewise, if you're an experienced person, you want to do something super awesome, again, we would love that as well. So yeah. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you very much.